This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Falcons analyst Jarvis Davis, Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman, and 11 Alive anchor reporter Maria Martin. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, our Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's talk about how one of last year's acquisitions has stepped up, and maybe we need to see the same from some of those this year. And someone is getting another chance, but did they actually earn it? And we'll wrap up talking about exactly where we would follow these Falcons across the country. But first, let's talk about what the Falcons need to do so they don't get got by another West Coast foe. Jarvis, the Falcons faced the Seattle Seahawks. When the Seahawks were coming off a 3-game losing streak, we saw how that turned out. Now the Falcons are facing the Las Vegas Raiders, who are on a 9-game losing streak. Now, look, we know the Falcons can be good again despite their own losing streak. They're talented. There's still a lot of potential. And we know how important it is for them to achieve that potential, like it's now or never, in all 3 phases of the game. So for you coming into a game against another bad team, which phase do you need to see the most improvement in? And are you concerned legitimately about whether the Falcons are going to fall yet again to, we're going to call them a lowly team in the Raiders?
It's the offense for me. Like, they have to kind of just figure this thing out, and however it looks, right? Because, you know, we know that Raheem Morris is riding with Kirk Cousins. I don't know if it's till the wheels fall off. I know we'll probably get into that a little bit later on, but I think right now the offensive side of the football has to carry this team in a certain light, right? Because I think that, you know, the Raiders present some things that they can take advantage of. Like, there was one positive that came out of last week's game. They were able to run the football. They were able to, Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson were able to get that thing going and starting to look like a nice tandem that we know they can be. So, and the Raiders are susceptible to the run. Like, Tampa had some success, you know, on tape running the football against those guys. So I think that if it's a 25-30 carry combined between Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson, I'm totally fine with that.
And Jarvis, on a scale of 1 to 10, how concerned, even with all the things you just said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how concerned are you that the Falcons will fall to this lowly Raiders team?
T, you are talking to a professional sports Atlanta fan. So it's a 5. I'm right in the middle, baby. I have nowhere else to be at this point in my life, because I know, like, my father gave me some great advice that I totally ignored when I was younger. And I will never be an Atlanta sports fan because they always build you up to let you down. So, you know, being that I did not follow my father's wise wisdom, I'm going to say and admit that, hey, I'm right here. I'm right in the middle, baby. I'm right in the middle. There's a possibility that Kirk Cousins can go out there and slang 4 touchdowns and, you know, even run one in. And there's a possibility that he can slang 4 of those bad boys and fumble the ball 3 times. So, like, that's a possibility. It could happen. So, yeah, I'm right there smack dab in the middle, T. That's where I'm at.
And you know what? That's fair, because in my lifetime, everybody told me just the opposite of your dad, by the way. They told me, hey, you're from New Orleans. You should be a Saints fan. The hell? So I was smart enough not to listen to those people. And that's why I'm a Steelers fan and I live my life in a real happy place. But Maria, talking to you about where this Falcons team is just in terms of, once again, coming into a game against a bad team and knowing that you still need to see them show their potential in all 3 phases in one game. But which phase do you need to see the most improvement from this coming Monday?
Well, first of all, I'm a Dolphins fan, so I think historically we've had our frustrations as well. Some highs of highs, and not capitalizing on those highs of highs have been the ultimate frustration for those that wear aqua on Sundays. No, for the Falcons, it's definitely the offense for sure. This is so frustrating because, as you guys have mentioned, we've seen what they can be. And I think that's the most frustrating aspect of it is you show your hand once and you expect to see that at some other point. I also still think it's in there somewhere, but I don't know where it's been the last, 4 weeks. Something is going wrong. There's consistent things where I feel like the Falcons can't have it all. You see the offense doing really well and the defense couldn't get there, and now flip the script after the bye week, and here's where we sit. So for me, it's the offense because you see steps towards improvement. I honestly saw that against the Vikings. As bad as the score looked at the end of the game, I saw that they were making strides, but it's when Kirk is turning the ball over that's the most concerning. Whether or not he is just pushing and pressing in those scenarios and forcing these turnovers to be really ridiculous mistakes, I'm not sure. I just think that at any given moment, I tend to agree with Jarvis. Kirk can be what we've seen him be. He broke a franchise record for crying out loud this year. We know it's in there, but every time I think they take 2 steps forward, they take 2 steps back. This is the perfect opportunity. But what scares me the most is this is a game where the Falcons really have a lot to play for. And really not just this game. I'm talking about the remaining of the schedule. Whereas the Raiders, what do they have to play for other than next year, contracts, their jobs, all of those things? Right. There's nothing at stake for the Raiders. That is a trap game if I've ever heard one. I hate this game. If I'm betting on this game, I stay away from it. I still think the Falcons are going to get a win on Monday night, but boy, do I hate this. I need to see the offense turn those red zone opportunities into not turnovers, into touchdowns.
So, Maria, I'm kind of hearing you lean in the direction of Jarvis when you look at it on a scale of 1 to 10, and you're concerned about whether or not the Falcons will not win this game. What's your concern?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably a 4.5. I'll go a little bit underneath Jarvis just to be a little bit different. I haven't been jaded by Atlanta sports my whole life, but for the last 5 years that I've been in this market, I totally understand the pain and frustration by every Atlanta fan. I think I've gotten myself to a point where I'm infiltrated in this community enough to understand the pain that comes with being an Atlanta sports fan. I was talking to somebody at work last night who said that they are usually a 2 beer minimum kind of guy on Sundays when they're watching the Falcons. He said the last 4 games, it's risen to 6. If that gives you any type of concern, he said, listen, we're going to need Kirk Cousins to fix everything, because he even suggested putting a cooler by his table while he's watching the Falcons. So I understand it's frustrating when you watch this team go out, especially because I do know that they can be great. They just have not been great. So I'll just go 4.5.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge. It's like they've shown us free little sparks of things. They've shown us here and there that they can kind of do it. They can get it done. Oh, they can get it. Oh, no, they didn't get it done. And that's kind of what the frustrating thing is. But before we talk to you, Free, because you are always what we consider our voice of reason on this show, we will go back to the guy who's been traumatized his entire life because apparently he has something to say.
You know what, T? I just want to kind of say this because I think I want to add a phase. Can I have a Raheem Morris phase?
I knew you were going to, is it coaching? I knew it.
You got
to add the coordinators in there too.
Yeah. So, they all kind of fall up under this rim. So, but I think it starts at the top. I like to start at the top. When it comes to, I feel like Raheem Morris has to be willing to make the hard decision. If he sees Kirk Cousins a pick in the first half, offense sputtering, and it's the second quarter, y'all trying to go in for a score, he turns it over again going into halftime. Are you gonna make the tough decision? Are you going to make that tough decision? I go back to, I even thought it was so interesting this week that he was talking about how Desmond Ridder wasn't the leader for this team, or Desmond Ridder wasn't enough of a leader for us to kind of move forward with him. And I was just like, man, okay, I understand Kirk is a leader. He's a leader in the locker room, but oh my gosh, does he lead on the football field? That's the question, and if Kirk starts playing badly, is he going to wait to the post-game press conference to say, oh yeah, we're going to take a look at the film and if we have to make that decision, that's what we're going to make. By this time, it's too late, sir, because you lose to the Raiders, man. Like, come on. Like, what are we really talking about? Like, there are grave consequences if you all lose to the Raiders. And to be honest with you, if the result is you're not getting the playoffs, shoot, you could have done that with Desmond Ridder.
True indeed. Or any other one of those quarterbacks that rotation and that roller coaster we've seen the last couple of seasons. But Maria, since Jarvis opened this up, I want to be fair and come back to you on this. And then we're going to ask Free to wrap it all up in a nice little bow for us. But for you, Maria, when you look at that fourth phase that Jarvis has just called out in terms of improvement, I know we talked about the offense being that phase, but what about that fourth phase if you look at the coaches as such? Where do they need to improve, or where is kind of your concern about how they'll call this game on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough, honestly, because you have two first-time play callers on either side of the ball, and Ra's done a really good job of deflecting some of that blame and putting it on himself, and also giving them maybe some more credit than they deserve. We don't know. So that is really tricky. And there are some tough decisions to be made. I know we're going to get into the whole nitty gritty of Kirk later on, and Free is sitting there so patiently. So I don't want to be long winded here. But what I will say is that I don't, let me foreshadow, I think probably what you'll all disagree with. I don't know that there's as hard of a decision to make for Raw in this moment as we sit here and talk right now. That is probably the polar opposite of what fans want to hear. I think the hard decisions are coming, and I do think that there are going to be some really hard ones to make, and that's kind of where you put the measuring tape and the hourglass up against Raw at that point in time, the magnifying glass. I just don't really think it's right now.
Yeah, understood. So for you, I'll call it exactly what it is, because I couldn't agree with Maria more. It's a trap game because of the very thing she mentioned. So for you, Aaron, when you kind of take a step back, you look at the fact that this is a good team. We've seen shades of what they can do and how important it is for them to achieve across all three phases. But two things. What, in terms of the phases, do you need to see the most improvement for? And you can include the coaches if you think that's the number one phase you need to see the most improvement for, but also your concern on a scale of 1 to 10 that this might be a game where the Falcons get got.
Well, let's make it a clean sweep. It is the offense that needs to improve the most, right? They need to go out there against I don't think the Raiders defense is bad. It just is not good. So it's somewhere in between. It is a competitive defense, but we've seen the Falcons play three of the top defenses in the NFL the last 3 weeks. I think that's a big contributing factor to why their offense has stagnated. They have struggled throughout the season against quality defenses, going back to week 1 against Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Seattle, etc. earlier this season. And they've really made their bones going up against bad defenses and putting up almost averaging 30 points a game against some of the weaker defenses in the league. And this Raiders team fits that bill. And so the expectation going into this game is you're going to be able to put up, 28 plus points against this Raiders defense. And if they can't do that against this defense, it really is a troubling sign. Now, as Maria said, I think they showed a lot of progress last week against the Vikings. So I'm optimistic that they can, perform much better. But I do think it's going to be probably a closer game than, the fans would like. And so, we might get to 7 or 8 beers at some point in the fourth quarter. But
I'll check in on him. Don't worry.
On a Monday night, no doubt.
Yeah,
that's what I told him. I was like, don't forget, this is Monday Night Football. Be careful.
Yeah. So pace yourself. Pace yourself, everybody who's watching that game Monday night. But on a scale from 1 to 10, I'm always at a 6. I've never been below a 6 as a Falcon fan. I remember the last time I was extremely confident, the Falcons are going to roll against a team that's struggling, was in 2005. They played the Green Bay Packers. I think they were 1-8 or 2-9 or something like that at that point in the season. They had just elevated like a 5th string running back off the practice squad by the name of Sam Congato, and I think he ran for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns, some ridiculous number against the Falcons, who were 6-2 or something like that at that point in time. And that's when I learned, okay, this is who the Falcons are, and I will never, ever, ever be below a 6. So I range between, on a good day, I'm at a 6. On a bad day, I'm at a 10. So I've never been below that. So today is a good day. I'm at a 6 when it comes to my concern against this Raiders team.
I will leave it at that because I feel like if I say anything too much, 1, 2, or all 3 of you might get triggered. We'll talk about how one of last year's acquisitions has stepped up and maybe some of this year's acquisitions need to. We'll talk about it when we take it under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And of course, that's FanDuel.com. And in case you were wondering, in that Atlanta Falcons versus Las Vegas Raiders game, the spread is -3.5 for the Falcons. So that's something to think about as you're watching this game. If you get a hunch in the middle of the game, again, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more at FanDuel.com. So never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and America's #1 sportsbook. So this is one of those good things, Maria, where we have heard something positive, something that is actually accurate, and something that is not controversial. And that is the fact that Kaden Elliss is the best pass rushing off-ball linebacker in the NFL. We heard that locally. We heard that nationally. We heard that from other players as we've seen him really just take off as one of the acquisitions for this Falcons team last year, who's just continued to ascend this season. So how has Kaden Elliss been able to really continue to have a bigger and bigger impact on this Falcons defense? What's the key to his success that's helped the Falcons defense to be more successful?
Man, Kaden is just that guy. And if you don't think that, you haven't been paying attention. And honestly, I believe that Kaden Elliss, if he were on any other team that's doing better than the Falcons, he would be a household name in the NFL. This kid is all over the defense. He does so many other things than what's required of just his role. And that's what all of the defensive players have said from the beginning of the year to now. He is the best off-ball linebacker. That is true. And before this front seven started to accumulate a bit more of a better pass rush over the last couple of weeks, you saw an off-ball linebacker leading your team in sacks and tackles. Number one, that should never happen. But number two, it's because it's Kaden Elliss. He's so much better than he's giving credit for. And I don't remember what week this was, but it was early in the season. I was asking around, what's an unsung hero, or who is an unsung hero on this defense? Literally every single guy had the same answer. And it was Kaden Elliss, because not only does he do what's required of him, but he does that and then some. And he's done that at a consistent rate ever since he came over to the Falcons from New Orleans. He has consistently been quietly incredibly good at his job and a couple of other people's jobs as well. So Kaden, I think, Jarvis, I saw that.
Yes.
Kaden, I think sky's the limit for Kaden. He should be a Pro Bowler. I don't think he will be, just because he's playing on a Falcons defense that has not been that great consistently throughout the year. It's frustrating to me because Kaden is one of the best linebackers, I think, in the NFL and doesn't get enough credit for it.
Yeah, and you're probably right, Maria. Unfortunately for him, he is on this Falcons team. And prior to that, as you mentioned, the Saints. So those aren't exactly franchises that are going to get you that type of look, especially because those franchises aren't winning. So, yeah, I think he is probably an unsung hero, probably underrated at his position. So it was good to kind of hear some of the national media notice the impact that he's having on this team. What about for you, Free, when you look at the way Kaden Elliss has played, especially as he's just continued to improve throughout this season, what makes him special? How's he been able to have the impact he has?
Well, I think he's just a football player. He comes from a football playing family. He has like 3 other brothers that have been in the NFL or currently in the NFL. They all play like different positions. One's like a 350-pound nose tackle. The other one's an edge rusher. He's an off-ball linebacker. I'm sure they got a safety in the family at some point. We probably got I think Kaden Elliss played quarterback in high school and all that stuff. So his dad obviously was a very good NFL player for a long time. He comes from a big family, a lot of siblings, adopted siblings. I'm sure there was a lot of roughhousing in the household. He's, I think, the oldest I know Maria knows a little bit more of his background, so she can fact check me on some of these things. So
you're right.
He kind of
Spot on.
is used to sort of corralling everybody, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what he does for the Falcons defense. He's the middle linebacker. He wears the green dot. He calls the defense. He's kind of alongside Jesse Bates, alongside Grady Jarrett. He's sort of taking on that leadership role. And then you couple that with the ability on the football field. Like his dad, he was a good pass rusher in college. He was a little undersized to play that in the NFL. And so he got to New Orleans and they were like, okay, if you're going to get on the field, it's not going to be as a defensive end. We know Ryan Nielsen, the former Falcons defensive coordinator, D-line coach. He loves those big D-ends, Zach Harrison and Calais Campbell. And he's like, you're not going to stick here as a D-end in my defense. And so they moved him to off-ball linebacker, and it took him a while to kind of learn that new position. But then you saw in his fourth year there, right before he joined the Falcons, he went off as a pass rusher, and they figured out a role for him. And then he comes to Atlanta, and he's doing everything. He's calling defense, he's doing coverage, he's doing the pass rush. But we know, like, his background is really getting after the quarterback. And the thing that he does so well is when you get him in the middle of that defense and you can blitz him and you can get those one-on-ones against guards and running backs. And you saw against Aaron Jones last week against the Minnesota Vikings that anytime he got into the backfield, he was just bullying that guy. And so I think he's just one of those guys that just does all the things. He does the dirty work, and then you can just sort of unleash him in these third down situations. And you've seen it these last couple of weeks, especially, because, the rest of the Falcons linebacker core, I think, is sort of getting it together. And so they can do their jobs a little bit better. So that allows him to be put in a position to do what he does best. And that's get after the quarterback.
Yeah, and I feel like, Jarvis, when we look back at last year, we look at the acquisitions, everybody, of course, was excited, and rightfully so, about Jesse Bates III, but there was also excitement about David Onyemata. Not so much. It was almost like Caden Ellis was kind of lost.
Kind of like a throw-in.
Yeah, exactly. Like he was kind of a throw-in,
Yeah.
right? But he's the guy that, and again, obviously Jesse Bates is who he is, but Caden Ellis is the guy who, in that space, if I remember correctly, Jarvis, linebacker core was one of those where we were like, I don't really know about what that's going to look like for this season. And yet here we are talking about that linebacker making, maybe, other than a Jesse Bates, maybe the most important impact on this Falcons defense.
And there's no question that particular group had the most questions. We talking about injury history with Troy Anderson and not necessarily knowing what you're going to get from him. Nate Landman, his limitations that he has, in pass coverage, right? So being just a 2-down linebacker, we know those guys have been exiled from the league, for the most part. So, but when you have a guy like Caden and I think that this is probably his best asset, but some will maybe look at it as his downfall. He can do so many things, and I wouldn't call him a great pass rusher. He's a good one. He's a really good one. But when you say, okay, what does he do that's great? I don't think you can necessarily come up with an answer for Caden Ellis. But I think his best asset is being able to do multiple things. And I think that ever since the bye week, Jimmy Lake has somehow figured out, maybe I can blitz him and put him in situations where, like Aaron talked about, he's one-on-one with the guard and he's swiping his hand, or he's matched up with a running back. Oh my God, this is easy work. And you just seen it, how he just works those. I'm in love with how he uses his hands, because a lot of times guys get so itchy and grabby with trying to bull rush and putting hands on it, trying to, I'm like, yeah, that's all good and well, but man, when you try to get home, you gotta work your moves, baby. You gotta do a little dancing. You know what I'm saying? It's time to get home. And I think Caden Ellison has that not Ellison. Ellis has that sense of urgency that you need in order to be able to get there on a consistent basis. So I think that's the biggest reason for me why he's been so active and he's been putting the quarterback on the ground, and you've been seeing him flying all around, because a lot of times, even like Aaron mentioned, go back to New Orleans, right? When you transition into a different position, that can hit you upside the head a little bit. Just from a standpoint of like, man, I know I can rush the passer. Look, I had 6 or 7 sacks. Come on now, let me get a little bit. But when you get to a point where you get an opportunity to do that from the position that you're playing right now, there's something that sparks up in him, and he looks like a different player when he's rushing the passer and coming from that off ball spot. So yeah, that's the biggest reason why I feel like he's been that guy, because Jimmy Lake has been put in situations that he can succeed.
Yeah, and maybe Free, a term that you would use when you think about Caden Ellis is maybe a jack of all trades and a master of none. But another one who's probably benefiting. Thank you, sir. You know me, George Smith. But I just wanted to, in our last couple minutes, because we're coming back for you, defense. So trust and believe, the rest of you, we're coming for you. But before we wrap up, wanted to just kind of talk about another guy who has trended up and is really one of those question marks that we had in that linebacker core. But we're like, ooh, we're finally seeing it. From Arnold Ebiketie, what have you seen from him, Free, that has helped him to be even more successful this season that could impact this game Monday night?
I think he's coming into his own. When I watched Arnold Ebiketie at Penn State, he was a very technical pass rusher. He had all the sort of physical athletic skills that you wanted to see in a good edge rusher, why he was billed from some people as a potential first-round pick. But he sort of always won with, as Jarvis said, using his hands in those pass rush moves. And I feel like it takes a little bit for that type of pass rusher to figure it out in the NFL, just because you're facing a much higher quality of offensive tackle. Those guys also have very good technique in the NFL. Like, you're not going to stick in the NFL as an offensive tackle if your technique is bad. And in college, you can kind of get away, with having good technique against tackles that don't have good technique. And so I think he kind of is starting to figure out where to use his pass rush moves, how to time his pass rush moves against different players. Like, I'm going to beat this guy with a speed rush. I'm going to beat this guy with power. I'm going to use, my spin move against those guys. And I think he's sort of now really starting to put that together. And you're starting to see this sort of consistency that we weren't seeing in the first 2 years from him week to week. And I think that's really where he's really hit his stride, just sort of figuring out the league. And it takes time for, we see a guy like Jared Verse impact right away, and then we just assume everybody's like that. And most guys take the better part of 2 or 3 years. Even TJ Watt wasn't looking like a Hall of Famer his rookie season and whatnot. So I think Arnold Ebiketie's really sort of turned that corner and starting to figure it out.
Yeah, and they're going to need him to keep turning that corner come Monday. Now, the change, it's going to come, but we don't know when. We'll talk about that when we come back in Next Up. This episode of our Atlanta football party is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Gametime Picks also filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Think about this. Gametime Picks has a curation that makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and they have a lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference, and seat views where you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today, because what time is it? It is game time. So, Aaron, Raheem Morris reiterated post-game, for the most part, that Kirk Cousins is his guy. But with calls for Michael Penix Jr., my question is this, and it's actually a two-parter. Is there going to be a moment, and Jarvis kind of alluded to this earlier, is there going to be a moment where Raheem Morris has to seriously give consideration to Michael Penix Jr. in this Raiders game, if not the rest of the season? But let's talk about this Raiders game. And if there's that moment, what do you think that moment would be for Ra to have to say, okay, it's Michael Penix time?
Well, the answer to your question, I hope not. I hope the answer is no.
Yeah, because that was not right. That was
something has gone wrong. But I do think this is kind of the final straw for Kirk Cousins, where if they can't get it together, as we talked about earlier, against this Raiders team that's on this 9-game losing streak, that doesn't have the world's best defense. They do have some playmakers. Looking at you, Max Crosby. They got to figure out a plan to block him. And so I think that's the moment, T. If we're worried about anything, it's going to be Max Crosby taking over this game, like we saw from TJ Watt in week 1. And he's stripping Kirk Cousins. And we've seen a lot of fumbles from Kirk. The Falcons have been very lucky, favorable in terms of recovering a lot of those fumbles this year. So it hasn't been as big a problem as it potentially could be.
Yeah.
But if he's throwing picks, fumbling the football, if he continues to turn this football over, and especially when we get into the red zone, I think Maria was talking about this team's ability to convert in the red zone. If we're getting the same issues over and over again that we've been getting the last 4 weeks in a game that we're all sitting here thinking should be somewhat of a rebound game. You saw progress last week, and that progress gets reversed this week on Monday Night Football. And, there's a narrative around Kirk Cousins that he's bad in primetime situations because that was an issue early in his career. That has not really been the case in recent years. But if we get, Washington primetime Kirk, again, I think on Monday Night Football, I think that's the moment where Raheem is going to have to say, if they're down, 2 scores or something in the second half because of Kirk's performance, that's the moment where he's going to be like, okay, we need a spark. And that's the moment for Michael Penix. But as I said, I hope we are not having that conversation on Monday night.
Yeah, and that's such a great call, Free, because Maria, if we are having that conversation, that doesn't bode well for what the first half probably looks like for these Falcons. But for you, if there is a moment in this Raiders game that could happen that would make Raheem Morris have to really, really think, okay, it's time to make a change, what would that be?
I mean, I got to be honest. I think things have to be going really bad for him to make a change. I don't think that it's not possible. I think that he could make a change if things are going completely south. But, as I had mentioned earlier, and Aaron just doubled down on, there was progress in moving the ball down the field. You just want to see that turn into more touchdowns and more points. And I don't know, I can't pinpoint exactly what's going on with Kirk. I'm sure he wishes he could do the same. I still think he's pressing and putting himself into situations that are uncharacteristic for Kirk Cousins. All these things that are coming out about him, the arm strength isn't there. The mobility isn't there. What did you think he was for the first 12 years of his career? I'm being serious. He's never had exemplary arm strength. He's never had exemplary movement as a quarterback. We've always known exactly what he is. So these are not new. It's just exciting to rip a guy when you have a guy that's just been drafted as a first-round pick sitting waiting in the wings. It's easy to do that, and I understand. But if he's consistently pushing the ball down the field and turning that into touchdowns against a Raiders defense who, as we've all mentioned, not that great, he's going to remain the starting quarterback. Once you make a change with your $100 million quarterback, that's it. You turn to Michael Penix. Everyone has said multiple times he is the future. You're saying that future is now. And I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm not saying it won't happen. I hope it doesn't, because at the end of the day, this is a team still in the thick of a playoff race, right? And Kirk Cousins was the guy that helped you get there. This is also a team who's done pretty well on the road. There's some outliers. Erase the Denver Broncos game from your mind. Nothing went right in that game. However, he's the guy that helped them get to the thick of this playoff race. It's hard to turn away from someone like that unless things are going the polar opposite direction, in my opinion.
And Jarvis, I think the other piece there is something we talked about earlier, which is if you do that and it doesn't work, then that could be a can of worms that you're opening such that it would look like Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder, back to Marcus, back to Dez, Taylor Heineke, Dez, Taylor. So that's another piece that you have to consider if you make that decision. But is there a situation you can see where Ra would actually make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm on board with what Maria and Aaron said. Like, when you think about like the interceptions, the turn the ball over, the inconsistencies, not looking like what you look like against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like, I mean, I know that's a high bar to set, 500 yards, 500 passing yards, 500 passing yards. I get it. But like, there has to be a middle ground there. And I think that's the problem that I have. There's no middle ground with Kirk. Either he's stinking it up or he's out there playing lights out. I was like, dude, I need you to level off somewhere, bro. It can't be I'm looking like a rookie quarterback and then I'm looking like a 13-year vet. Like, can you like squeeze that down somewhere in here? So that's why I get frustrated. That's why I say this is probably who Kirk is. Like, he's 36 years old. like Maria mentioned, he's never been mobile. He's never had the strongest arm. At some point, those assets that you have, the arm that has made you all that money, that non-exemplary arm that has made you all that bread, it starts to falter. and being non-mobile in today's game, it's gonna go down. It's gonna get worse. So I feel like this is what I feel like we're seeing, because I can't quite put my hand on. I'm not inside Kirk's head. I'm not gonna even try to get inside Kirk's head at this point. So I feel like this is kind of where he is. And if it's a point where, we're 4 games into this losing streak, no touchdown passes, 8 interceptions, like we all know the numbers, and he goes out there, starts doing those exact same things, Rod has to make the change. He has to be able to make the change. And I think that I believe that he will make it, because I like Rod, and I like what he does as a head coach, as a kind of like a CEO of a company. I feel like he can do a good job at that, but
Yeah.
it can't be a situation where we're sitting up here in the fourth quarter, the clock about to strike 0, and the Falcons are losing to the Raiders, and Kirk has had another bad game. That just can't happen. He can't let that happen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because I think at this point, when you look at the rest of the schedule, because now it's literally down to Bucks and Falcons. Either you win this division or you're out. There's no path from a wild card perspective. So yeah, you don't really have the good luxury or the good fortune to wait another game or another 2 games. No, it's down to the wire. So you may have to do something like what we saw and I know it was a different situation because it was injury related, but we saw what Kirby Smart had to do. If you look at Georgia, but several years ago when Nick Saban had to make that tough move, it was like, hey, make a quarterback change or lose this championship game. And tough call, but you saw that it yielded results. So yeah, you don't want Raheem Morris to have to make that call on Monday, but on the same token, we know that he has to be prepared because it absolutely may happen. But where we are continuing to see some strides is on the defensive side of the ball, but not with everybody. So we want to know who actually needs to take a step up front. We'll talk about it on the other side. This episode of our Atlanta Falcons football party is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to take the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel today to get in on all the action. So again, you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet, and that's at FanDuel.com. So never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, which is an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and FanDuel is also America's #1 sportsbook. So Jarvis, we absolutely talked about the positives of what we've seen from Caden Ellis, what we've seen from Arnold Ebiketie, which is great, which is absolutely great. That's a part of the reason that we're seeing the success that we have been seeing on this back side of the season. But there are some others who need to step up. So for you, who else up front needs to step up for this Falcons team to take that first step, at least in getting back into the win column come Monday against the Raiders?
I want him to continue to do this. And first of all, it's David Onyemata. I feel like I've been seeing some things. He's been flashing a little bit more lately, winning some one-on-ones, up front. And I think that I want to see more of that from him, because we know what Grady Jarrett brings to the table. Totally get that. Kentavious Street has been a nice rotational guy. He's been stepping in and doing his thing. We've seen what Zach Harrison has been doing. I think, David Onyemata, part of that, coming from the Saints, that crew, like, Caden Ellis has been stepping up, like, hey, man, I need you to step up just a little bit. I know you're 30 plus, but hey, you still got some juice. And I've been able to see that. And he's, specifically against the Vikings, I think that, he probably had one of his better games this season. So I think David Onyemata is a guy that I've had my eye on, obviously. And I feel like he's been kind of gradually moving towards the guy that we saw last year and stepped into a nice role when Grady Jarrett went down.
Yeah, and maybe, like you said, before the injury, because we know David Onyemata obviously had his injury last season that kind of slowed him down. So maybe it did take him a little time to kind of ramp up fully this season, but we're starting to kind of see the Onyemata that is the reason Terry Fontenot brought him over. What about for you, Maria, up front? Who are you saying, hey, we need to see a little bit more from you so that the Falcons can at least start getting back to winning, starting with this game against the Raiders?
Yeah, I mean, we know Grady Jarrett has been Grady Jarrett, the Grady Jarrett that we saw prior to him getting hurt. I mean, I feel like he's exactly where he was prior to last year, which has been really exciting to see. At times we've been frustrated because we see him chasing guys down on the second level and we're thinking, no, defensive linemen should have to do that. So he's been someone who I've been very impressed with, obviously. I'm going to go a different route and say Eddie Goldman, just because he gets his first sack. And he's been a guy who's had a very interesting storyline. You know, he comes to the Falcons, is off the Falcons, is done with football, is back with football. You know, he's kind of been back and forth. And he's somebody that everybody was super fired up about in OTAs and in training camp, and just the imagination of what Eddie Goldman can be. I think we finally saw glimpses of it. I mean, there's been games throughout the year where he's in and he does something, not necessarily getting home to the quarterback, but helping this pass rush get to where they hope to be and where we have seen signs the last 4 straight games. I'm more of the issues are on the back end of the defense kind of gal right now. But I think that if you have those guys consistently do what they've done the last 4 weeks up front, with contributions from an AK and Eddie Goldman and Kentavious Street in a rotation type of setting, I think they can find a lot of success as we close out the year. And especially they're going to need to, because it's going to get dicey here in a wild ride the last 4 games of the year.
Yeah. Oh, no, secondary. Don't worry. We've got time to get to you too. But first, we'll talk about up front. Who do you need to see step up a little bit more in order for this pass rush and this Falcons defense to be more successful, Aaron?
Let's talk about Matthew Judon, right? The Falcons gave up a 3rd-round pick for him.
We went 42 minutes without talking about 15.
Yeah, I felt like did y'all have like a group chat last night that said like we're not allowed to talk about Matthew Judon?
No, we were waiting for you to talk about it.
Waiting for Free to do it. Okay. I want Free to be
next.
I said Free wants to talk about him, so go ahead.
Early Christmas gift. Thank you. Judon, he's done some things the last couple of weeks. He's got 2 sacks in the last 3 games. If only he had that same pace for the entire season, we might be talking very differently about how that trade has worked out. And so, you saw last week he got a nice sack, a sort of cleanup sack. That was something that he did quite a bit in New England to sort of pad those numbers. And when that front is really working together, and Caden Ellis and Grady Jarrett and Arnold Ebiketie, and then that's the thing we've kind of learned with Matthew Judon. Like, he's not always necessarily the guy this season that is going to lead the pass rush, but he's part of the pass rush. And I think, coming up down the stretch against this Raiders team and some of these other opponents, there's opportunities for there. If you can have, Caden Ellis coming through that A gap and Grady Jarrett, and then you have AK coming off the edge, and then you can just sort of have Matthew Judon doing his thing on the opposite edge. All of a sudden, like, you have like a 4-man rush that's actually pretty formidable. And we've seen that sort of come together these last couple of weeks with 9 sacks in 2 games. Like, the fact that the offense is so terrible at this point in time, like, we're not even talking about that. And this would be like, imagine you could time travel back to September or October or November and say, hey guys, the Falcons are gonna get 9 sacks in 2 games. Like, people would be celebrating the streets. And we're not celebrating the streets because that's basically how bad the offense has been. So I think Matthew Judon is a guy that I sort of circle that, like, if he can step up to a level and get to the level that Ellis and Grady and AK are at, you're looking at the sort of pass rush that the Falcons, I think, envision going into the season. And it's like, okay, we didn't get that for the first 3 months, but if we just get that for the last month of the season, like, hey, Falcon fans, we just got to take what we can get at this point. The beggars can't be choosers. I say it all the time. And I always seem to say that statement when I'm talking about the Atlanta Falcons pass rush. I don't know why. It just feels like we're constantly begging for something good. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think Jarvis, Maria, and even you, Aaron, are probably begging, pleading, and wondering, hey, 31, is there any possibility that maybe you can give help, bring help, send help to the secondary? Hey, that's why at the beginning of the season, there was so much excitement about Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons and what they could do. Like Free said, now that you've kind of taken a step back, looked at what Matthew Judon really did in his previous life, what we've seen him do the last couple of games now makes sense, right? Maybe we overestimated him, and the real Matthew Judon and the real numbers are coming to fruition. What about Justin Simmons? Hey, Jarvis, I'm not knocking him necessarily for just last week, because we know Justin Jefferson and by extension, Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson are just otherworldly. Talking about the body of work overall, like how can he or anybody else in that secondary that I would say not named AJ Terrell can really kind of step up their game and help this Falcons team first with the Raiders to get back on track with defending, and then for the rest of the season in hopes of getting them back in the conversation for the NFC South?
I mean, I kind of look at coming in, Justin Simmons as a player. I just look at him as a guy that can take the ball away. And I feel like he hasn't been in those situations to be able to do that. So from a scheme standpoint, maybe you do some zone blitzing. I know they've been playing a lot more man coverage, and we kind of saw the results of that, in this last game against the Vikings. So, yeah. I'm trying to be nice here, Maria.
Sorry.
Help me out here.
Sorry.
Help me. I'm trying to be nice. I always want to be the bad guy every time we do these shows. So, but today, but just from Justin Simmons specifically, I feel like he's the guy that's going to have to say, hey, coach, I normally operate this way, and this is how I can feel like I can get my hands on the football. Like, people have those conversations all the time. Because you're a vet in the game, you're a former all-pro type guy, so I feel like we haven't really seen that. There have been some moments where he's had some good games, but I haven't really seen that all-pro Justin Simmons. And it's starting to make me think or feel like there was a reason why he was on the street, a month before or a few weeks before the season started. So, like, I'm trying to figure out who he is or what he is at this point. Because to me, if you ask me, if I'm Terry Fontenot, it's a one and done type situation for me. So I feel like he's a type of veteran that you need to get some contribution from. I'm not saying he need to be the catalyst on the back end of the defense. That's just Jordan. That's his job. But you do need to be a guy to come in from time to time and make a play for your team, because you have those capabilities. Now, if they're diminished and you're done, all right, cool. But if you still have something left in the tank in these last 4 games, we need to see it.
Secondary definitely got exposed in this last game for sure, guys. And, the only thing that I want people to know is in the last 4 games that the Falcons have lost, opposing quarterbacks, 11 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. They have to take the ball away, and it starts with the secondary.
Yeah. And for you, Freed, I mean, that's a great point that Maria makes, because obviously the turnover battle when your offense, and not saying that Kirk Cousins is going to do what we've seen the last couple of weeks, but at some point you've got to balance out that turnover ratio. So where it's easy, and I'll say easy, but where it could pick up, because the sacks wise, getting to the quarterback, tackles for loss, your front is pretty much doing a decent job of that. So now on the backside, you've got to give something that's going to offset if Kirk Cousins does what he does. What can Justin Simmons do, or what should we be expecting him to do to add to that?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting against this Raiders team, just because these are the 2 teams that are the worst, some of the worst in the turnover margin this year. I think the Raiders are dead last in turnover margin. I think the Falcons are 28th in turnover margin. And so I think with Justin Simmons specifically in this Raiders game, like, the Falcons are going to have a challenge against a guy, I think some people might know who he is, Brock Bowers.
Brock Bowers guy.
Rookie season. You may have heard of him.
You had to mention him.
I love
But
him.
like,
Offensive player of the year, rookie offensive player of the year candidate. Oh yeah, him.
Yeah. Is he doing well? I don't know. I haven't heard anything about it. But I think
Brock.
They don't really have a guy that you can say, go lock down him. And I think they're just going to have like 4 or 5 guys doing it, because like Brock Bowers basically is essentially a slot receiver. He's like a 240-pound slot receiver, and that's one of the reasons why he's so good at what he does. And so, like, I think Justin Simmons is going to be a big part of that. And so this is the kind of the week where it's like, get a couple of pass breakups, on third down in the red zone or whatever against Brock Bowers, even if you're not turning the ball over, we know that's Jesse Bates' job. That's where I think Justin Simmons can really have an impact in this Raiders game.
Indeed. Well, there's somebody else on the other side of the ball that might actually want to have some type of impact. Don't know if he will, don't know if he won't, but ultimately speaking, the Falcons better watch out for him. We'll talk about it on the other side. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Gametime, which has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They have this really cool priority thing that's called curation, and you may want to make that a priority because it'll help you to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. They also have all-in pricing, which is a toggling feature that shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, taking the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Gametime. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Remember, they also have a lowest price guarantee, or they'll credit you 110% of the difference. So why not download that Gametime app today? Now, terms do apply, but again, you can create that account for $20 off your first purchase and download it right after you wrap up, of course, the Atlanta Football Party, because what time is it? It is game time. So I don't know. We don't know. Nobody seems to kind of know what or who rather will be under center for the Las Vegas Raiders come Monday, because Aiden O'Connell suffered a bone bruise in the Raiders game Sunday against the Buccaneers, right? But according to ProFootballTalk.com, he still has a decent chance of starting. But with things up in the air for him, Aaron, we might see a guy that was supposed to possibly be the next for the Atlanta Falcons. And we all know that didn't happen. But sometimes the best of you will show up when your nemesis shows up. So if Desmond Ridder happens to be QB1 Monday, how much motivation could this be of a revenge game for him that'll make this a Raiders, dare I say it, win?
It's going to be huge motivation. I think we kind of know Desmond Ridder plays with a chip on his shoulder. Maybe that chip got the better of him sometime, and maybe that led to him forcing some things, trying to prove himself last year that did not result in the ways that it did. But like, that's a heck of a motivator going into this game against your former team, to basically say, yeah, you guys got rid of me. I know I went through some downs in Arizona, but I'm back here in Las Vegas. And the Raiders don't have a long-term quarterback, right?
Yeah.
And this is his golden opportunity to say, hey,
what about me?
I can do something. Yeah. It's so, and it going against his former team, he has all the motivation in the world to go out there and ball out. Now, whether he will do that was always the concern with Desmond Ridder, where it was like, you see the ability, you see the potential, it's all there for him. And then, as we've been talking about with Kirk these last couple of weeks, bad things tend to happen in turning the football over. And that has not been something that he has escaped since he's left Atlanta. So hopefully Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons and AJ Terrell and all those guys can take advantage of that. But absolutely, if he's going to start this game, I fully expect him to go out there and want to absolutely dunk on the Atlanta Falcons. And as we were talking about earlier in today's show, as a longtime Falcon fan, I don't have the level of confidence that they will not allow him to dunk on them, given this history of this franchise. So that is something that I need Raheem Morris and company to change, so that I can, say that I'm not always at a 6. I can get down to Maria's level and just, hey, what does it feel like to be at a 4.5 when you have that level of concern? That feels like, a fresh spring morning or something like that.
That's how people describe me, honestly.
Yes, you are a ray of sunshine.
Thank you.
I want to know what that feels like. So I would love to see the Falcons not let Desmond Ridder get his revenge this Monday night, but we'll see what happens.
All right, Maria, let's go in the happy place. Since you are our sunshine, we're going to say that, yes, Desmond Ridder is probably going to attempt to ball out, but we also know that Desmond Ridder can get in Desmond Ridder's way. So how much of a possibility is this a revenge game that's going to yield something for him, as opposed to the Falcons can actually take advantage and get something that we said they haven't gotten, at least on the back end, in takeaways?
Very unpopular, but I was always a big advocate for Desmond Ridder, not necessarily because I think he's like a great quarterback or he's otherworldly or whatever. I just think the situation with what happened with him in Atlanta was completely unfair to him. I didn't think he was ever set up to succeed. I hated the way that everything played out for Desmond. And that's not to say I think he can go out and ball out anywhere else. I just don't think he got a fair shake at his first year in the NFL. So for sure, Desmond is looking at this like, what happened to me in Atlanta sucked. Let me show you what I can actually do. So that worries me a little bit, just because we know that players, when they play with a motivation to that caliber, can be very dangerous. But as you guys have both mentioned, or really all three of you have mentioned, Desmond Ridder tends to get in his own way a lot, which is one of the more frustrating aspects of him as a quarterback. If he can channel that and learn from that and not let that get to him, this could be very dangerous. However, I just don't believe it's going to be very dangerous for the Falcons. It's kind of why I'm at a 4.5. If we do see Desmond Ridder trot out there, because remember, Aiden O'Connell obviously leaving in an air cast, but did practice. I mean, regardless of what quarterback we're going to get, Aiden's going to be banged up.
He was at a walkthrough. The coach said he was at a walk. He was there at walkthrough.
But still, he's not going to be 100% regardless. And then, Desmond coming in, who, remember, was in tears earlier this year when talking about having another opportunity. This means a whole lot to Desmond Ridder. Great kid. I think he's awesome. Do I think he's going to have a lot of success against the Falcons? Not necessarily. But yeah, Desmond Ridder revenge game loading for sure. He really wants this, I bet, more than anybody else. And that's tricky when you've got two sides of the coin. Two quarterbacks that can turn the ball over a ton, by the way. But you've got Kirk Cousins, who the pressure is immense right now. It's nothing he's not faced before in his career. But then you also have Desmond, who not really playing with pressure, so to speak, but playing with internal pressure of, I want to show my former team, y'all got rid of me and y'all did me dirty. And that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah. And Jarvis, I'm going to do this on purpose to trigger you. Okay. What if the Falcons going to Falcon Monday? I mean, that would be prime real estate for Desmond Ridder to do some damage.
You know what? I think, gosh, I hate that I'm about to say this. I'm so uncomfortable about what I'm about to get ready to say.
Be you, man. Be you. You're with family.
It would be impossible for Desmond Ridder to get revenge on the Falcons because the man still has some of those inconsistencies. Like, they are being very simple when it comes to play calling. This dude is I'm talking about as soon as the ball is snapped, boom, he's locked in on who he's about to get ready to throw the football to. So as long as Jimmy Lake doesn't go back to what he did previous pre-bye week, from a defensive scheme mindset standpoint, I feel like there's no way possible that they can Falcon. I know that the fact that I just said that.
Why are you doing this?
If for those of you listening on the audio, if you would have seen the look on my man's Aaron Freeman face, he just looked like the person that just said Jarvis just made the Falcons lose this game. This game is over. It's an L.
You did.
It's already L.
What do you mean? You did.
You know where to go.
So,
Jarvis.
So I'm just saying, like, just given what I've seen of Desmond Ridder this year in this last game against Tampa, man, it'll be hard for them to put up enough points to win this game.
Can I say something?
Wrap us real quick.
Please.
Really quickly. I understand Falcons fans, and this is why I never say the Falcons will. I say I don't think the Falcons will, just in case. And I don't want to do that because I have learned and I understand that it triggers Falcons fans to win. And here goes Jarvis. He's like, it's not going to happen. That means the Falcons got that big L on Monday Night Football because of you.
Yep. And you can thank that guy in the lower part of this screen for anything bad that happens Monday night. But hey, you'll get to hear him talk about it. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by the Atlanta Football Party Mondays and Thursdays, and be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're free and available wherever you download your podcasts. And of course, like I said, you'll see the guy at the bottom and the guy at the top for post game come Monday. Have a good weekend.